obsessed with the murder of American aid worker Peter Kassig, and that, of course, is dominating headlines this morning.
Yeah, the killing of Peter Kassig, a former US Army Ranger turned aid worker, was confirmed by US authorities on Sunday, soon after the release of a fairly gruesome video by the Islamic State group. The New York Times reports that Barack Obama condemned the killing in a statement aboard Air Force One. He said Mr. Kassig was taken from us in an act of pure evil by a terrorist group. The Times also notes that Obama called him Abdul Rahman Kassig, which was a way of acknowledging he had converted to Islam and underlining the fact that the Islamic State group had killed a fellow Muslim. The 26-year-old had disappeared in October last year when the ambulance he was in driving with a colleague was stopped at a checkpoint, and the Times quotes a letter he had written to his family and managed to smuggle out in recent months, and he said that he sensed that he was going to die.
Now, in the video, there are threats of attacks on the West, and some are taking that very seriously.
That's right. The UK Daily Telegraph's front page headline talks of a threat to bring slaughter to the streets of Britain. David Cameron condemned the depravity of the killing. He has previously warned of the possibility of terrorist attacks against the UK. The Daily Telegraph quotes former British Army Chief Lord Dannatt, who says the West may have to think the unthinkable and commit ground troops to help Iraqi forces, though he does acknowledge that there isn't a political appetite for it. Professor Peter Neumann, an expert on Islamic radicalisation from King's College London, says there may be lone wolf attacks in Britain, similar to the one in Ottawa last month in which a soldier was killed. He also notes, though, that the Islamic State group is under pressure, and that is backed up by Fawaz Gerges of the London School of Economics. He says that hostages and killing hostages remains the only way that jihadists can strike out against the West. There's a similar tone from Martin Chulov in The Guardian. He says that the murder of Peter Kassig and a group of Syrian soldiers comes a week after a week in which the Islamic State group suffered a wave of setbacks, particularly coalition airstrikes that have battered them, including killing a chief aide to the leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Chulov says the recent wounds to the group's reputation appear to have stung.
All right, there's also the story that's being talked about in the international papers today about another hostage, this time in Libya.
That's right. The Italian Gianluca Staviano was freed after 8.5 months in captivity. This follows the release of another Italian hostage earlier last week. The La Stampa says that he had been held by Ansar al-Sharia, with the jihadist militia in Libya that actually recently swore allegiance to the Islamic State group. La Stampa reports that Salviato hailed the great work done by Italian authorities, but it also reports that he is in poor health because he's a diabetic, and he went more or less months without access to any medicine.
Let's stay in Africa. Tell us what the international papers are saying about the Ebola outbreak in Mali. Several reported cases there, and newspapers carrying a few testimonies from doctors.
That's right. The London Independent has an account written by Javid Abdelmonem. He's a London accident and emergency doctor who regularly does missions for Médecins Sans Frontières. He recently returned from Sierra Leone, where he was working in an Ebola clinic. He said that nothing had prepared for him for the horrors of the disease, not even administering to cholera patients in Haiti, which he has done before. He saw many people die before his eyes, but he did manage to successfully treat some patients. Upon his return to London, however, he says that he felt like a pariah. Really close friends of his were refusing to meet him until the 21-day incubation period was up. He also says he finds it hard to sympathise with an awful lot of people he sees in his accident and emergency room now, because he says they have it easy in comparison to the people he treated in Sierra Leone. The Washington Post has another story from Sierra Leone. It's pretty chilling, about an Ebola doctor whose test came back negative, prompting celebrations, and his colleagues embraced him, but his symptoms remained, and another test a week later came back positive. He's now being treated in the US, where his wife and 2 children live, and he's in a critical condition. The doctors he celebrated with have been quarantined. 320 Sierra Leonean workers have died from the disease since the outbreak started.
All right, that puts things in perspective. Chinese medical staff have been dispatched to West Africa to help treat Ebola patients.
That's right. China has been criticised for the slowness of its reaction, but last week it committed personnel to help with the outbreak. The Liberian Observer newspaper reports that a Chinese team arrived in Liberia on Saturday. 160 medical officers from the People's Liberation Army. They're the first of 500 staffers that are expected. The team, according to its leader, is well trained in the Ebola virus. China will also provide urgently needed medical supplies and equipment at a cost of almost €4 million.
We know the virus is also affecting the economy, especially in West Africa. It's having an effect on commodities in particular.
Yeah, cocoa in particular, cocoa beans. That is in return affecting the world chocolate market. The Washington Post reports a warning from the two biggest chocolate makers in the world. That's Mars Inc. and the Swiss Barry Callebaut. And the world is running out of chocolate, and farmers just can't produce enough cocoa to meet demand. And they say the deficit is expected to grow. Ebola's effects on labour movement in West Africa is obviously having an effect, but there's also the dry weather in recent years in both Ghana and the Ivory Coast, and they are the two of the biggest producers in the world, and that has greatly reduced production. And demand is growing as well, particularly in China. Now, agronomists are trying to plug the gap by developing trees that can produce up to 7 times the amount of cocoa beans. But ultimately, it might result in diluted, blander chocolate becoming the norm.
All right, Oliver Farry, thank you very much. With the ripple effects of Ebola, they are one of the contributing factors towards the shortage of cocoa. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Stephen Carroll. We're going to take a short break, but we're back in just a few minutes with another edition of World News, so do stay tuned to France 24. For that, we'll have our focus segment on the rise of the far right in Germany.